I'm Peter Wood, President of the National Association of Scholars. I've been invited tonight by the Williams College Debate Club, and my Ben Fishberg in particular, I give my thanks. I see that we're going to videotape tonight with this sophisticated system, and I appreciate that. The reason I am invited is that about a month ago, my organization released a study, 360-page analysis of what goes on at one of your peer institutions, Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. That report has arrived differentially in different parts of the world. It attracted a lot of media attention, most immediately the Wall Street Journal and other places. And it attracted the attention of some of the conservative conductors, people like Rush Limbaugh or on the one place where it has attracted a lot of attention with virtually no comment is Bowdoin College itself. Now, this makes this event to me rather important. This is the first time any of Bowdoin's peer institutions has broken the tone of silence around this report, and I congratulate Williams in having courage to do that. I know this isn't an easy topic for a lot of people, and I think it's a healthy and important thing that this kind of invitation is extended. I think probably the best way into this topic is with a little bit of history. The college that I studied for the last 18 months is a pretty exact match for Williams in some ways. Both of you are colleges that were founded in the early days of the Republic. Bowdoin in 1793, although it was about 10 more years before it actually had students. It was founded by Congregationalist ministers and remained a confessional Congregationalist college for most of its history into the mid-1960s. It was the college of Nathaniel Hawthorne, a Longfellow, of Joshua Chamberlain, hero of the Battle of Gettysburg, who also received these sword mathematics. Then became the president of Bowdoin College, having also been a professor of rhetoric there for some years. That's to say that it's a college that's pretty deeply entwined with American history and in important ways, literary, intellectual, and political. The college began to shift rather later than many colleges did towards both secularization and towards a kind of modernization at the very end of the 1950s. A president named Coles decided that a college that was solely grounded in what it called the collegiate model needed to begin to do something to embrace the developments in modern science. He created on campus a modernistic building, the first one of its kind there, and for a time had the highest tower in the state of Maine. The Coles Center was meant to bring science and modernity to campus, and did that by inviting and recruit faculty members who were more specialists than they were the generalists that Bowdoin had up to that time focused on. He also brought some research into the lives of the Bowdoin students. Up to that time, they were used to a pretty strongly framed core curriculum. Many of them took the same courses for all 4 years. Under Coles, a senior seminar was created that focused on research. But Coles was kind of an appetizer to what was then to come. In 1969, what I call the inflection point in Bowdoin's history, the college got a brand new president, a man named Howells. Howells was a Bowdoin graduate, Rhodes Scholar, come back from Oxford with a doctoral degree in history, rejoining Bowdoin as a faculty member of the history department. When he was selected to be his president in 1969, he gave an inauguration speech in which he laid out a breathtaking agenda. He said that there was nothing in Bowdoin's past that deserved to be honored simply because it was there. The tradition itself had no merit, and therefore he felt free to dispatch it. He titled his speech The New Humanism, and in it he declared that there would be henceforth no academic requirements at Bowdoin other than 32 courses to graduate and completing the requirements of the major. If the major felt too confining to the student, the college would take generous steps towards allowing the student to create his own major. College had been all male up to that point and announced it would be co-ed. The college had been using that newfangled device, SATs, to help select students who were capable of meeting the college's academic rigors. He made the SATs optional. He took a few other steps. He announced that the college would have an African American Studies program. A year later, he added an Environmental Studies program. Those were the first two interdisciplinary studies programs that were part of his work. He took a few other steps that might at the time have sounded just rhetorical, but turned out to be more than that. He said that coherence in education didn't emerge from students or faculty following a prescribed path of study, but rather the coherence would emerge from students' individual decisions, emergent coherence, meaning something like this. You take a course, you get interested in some aspect of it, and you find another course that follows up on that need, and another, and an item, at least add 32 items. This new approach he described with the term liberation. This was a curriculum of liberation. Students would be henceforth liberated from the stale dictates of the past. Tradition is dead and should be buried, and be buried. Didn't take very long for Bowdoin College to find that there were some disadvantages in this approach. So, beginning in the 1970s, they discovered that most of the students taking advantage of their curriculum of liberation felt liberated from math, English, history. They began to take what they found easiest and began to essentially follow their likes into that which they already knew about or were comfortable taking. That wasn't true of every student. It was true of enough students that faculty became alarmed. The next step in this history of the college's transformation, an attempt by the faculty to claw back to some academic standards. By the time they first tried this in 1978, they discovered they already had a problem. That is that for more than 10 years, the college had been recruiting faculty specialists to be valued precisely because they were specialists, and now that there was a substantial body of these specialists among the faculty, there was a great reluctance to take on the task of trying to teach students anything like a set of core courses or general education requirements. So one problem was when they began to think, well, our students aren't really learning to write very well, maybe we should require some college writing for everybody. The English department said, look at us. The next step was the foreign languages. Bowdoin had a pretty strong history of foreign language instruction. Enrollments had dwindled. There was a recognition that students were missing something that was usually considered a necessary part of a liberal education. They thought momentarily about adding a foreign language requirement, and then they realized, well, we can't really require anything of our students. That would violate their autonomy. So they did the next best thing. They strongly recommended to students that they take a foreign language. This pretty much ran through the curriculum. By my count, there were 12 separate commissions that the college has created in the years since President Powell, in which the faculty got together and cogitated about what was really important to have a coherent, cogent liberal arts education. They came to some key decisions about what was important, and then they punted and said, well, we can't really ask our students to do this. Were they concerned that they were asking too much from the students, or were they concerned about whether they were asking too much from themselves? Having poured through hundreds of pages of faculty minutes, I'm inclined to think the answer is that the faculty were more afraid of imposing on themselves the rigors of trying to teach general education requirements to a body of students who have been recruited on the promise of absolute freedom. So that's the background to part of this study. The transformation of Bowdoin College from one of the most traditional liberal arts colleges in the country to a college that is pretty much like every other liberal arts college in the country, having thrown its curricular requirements to the winds. It now finds itself in need of some actual mission. What it chose to do, again, is not a story that is unusual to Bowdoin. It's pretty common. They decided that what really accounted for liberal arts education was not knowing anything in particular, but becoming really good at critical thinking. Critical thinking is a term that had essentially zero substance to it. There was no definition of critical thinking put forward by the faculty or by anybody else. It's just what was bound to emerge if you take 1,700 students, turn them loose, give them a potpourri of courses on all sorts of subjects. By the end of 4 years, they must be critical thinkers. No way to test it, really. The few instances in which there has been effort to find what critical thinking is and see if it's happening have turned up rather embarrassing evidence that students are better critical thinkers when they arrive as freshmen than they are after 4 years of education there. Bowdoin's been doing some fancy footwork to explain away that claim. Not my claim, but their own claim. So, how did I get into the business of examining Bowdoin College? I am not an alumnus. I have never been a faculty member there. I have no real prior contact with the college at all as the study began. It began on the golf course in 2010 when an affluent New York businessman named Tom Klingenstein, who has a summer house in Maine, was invited by his friend, the president of Colby College, for a golf outing that would include the president of Bowdoin College, a man named Barry Mills. Klingenstein and Mills met at least by Tom's account of things. Along the way, Mills, being someone like most college presidents on the lookout for new possible donors, asked Tom about his philanthropy and asked in particular why he didn't give it to his alma mater being Williams College. Tom implied something to the effect of too much emphasis on diversity. We went on to play their golf game and had a little bit more chatter about this, in which Tom explained, well, Williams College seems to be obsessed with recruiting the kinds of students who aren't really the sorts of people who think can benefit from a liberal arts education. What do you mean by that? I only had some exchange, perhaps a little bit of testing. But the golf game ended and the two went their way. A few months later, President Mills gave his convocation speech at Bowdoin for the fall. And these presidential events all pretty much have the same flavor. The president congratulates the college on being next to utopia, the best place imaginable. Speaks of the splendors of this year's class, the achievements of the most recent year, faculty awards, that sort of thing. But then he went on to confess that there were some things about Bowdoin that troubled him. One was that the college was becoming so expensive that many of the kinds of students he wanted to recruit to the college could no longer afford it. But he really didn't know how to solve that problem. And the second problem was that he was drifting too far outside the mainstream of American opinion. It was becoming more difficult to persuade parents and grandparents that's where you want to send your children. He went on to explain that part of that had to do with the notion that Bowdoin's faculty was almost all somewhere on the political left, and the lack of balance concerned some parents who founded a few conversations and had to demonstrate that. And allowed that it really would be a good thing if Bowdoin College could create more ideological balance, more diversity of opinion. But, he then added, he didn't shouted out in the midst of Mill's backswing, "I hate diversity," and sliced it off. Things just went downhill from there. We got a picture in this convocation speech, which was videotaped. I've seen it, and transcript has been published of it, of the Gulf opponent as a social bore, as a racist, as someone who espouses views of the world that would be anathema to any civilized person, and therefore not welcome at Bowdoin College. That caricature of Clemenceau soon reached him. He's probably the wrong person to cast in the role of the English villain. He is the chairman of the Claremont Institute, a published and reformed playwright, a person of considerable cultural sophistication, and a lover of Lincoln, with a many thousand volume Lincoln library in his New York apartment. When he saw the picture of himself in Mills presented, he was momentarily angry, but then something like irony kicked in. He wrote his own response in the form of an article in Claremont Review Books titled Gulf Story, in which he disputed the account of what happened that day. But he took seriously Mills's proposal that there might be something wrong with a college that is politically saturated with people from one part of the political spectrum and oddly doesn't seem to have any room at all for people elsewhere on the political spectrum. Bowdoin College, depending on which technique you use to count, has about 182 faculty members. 3 of them are self-confessed conservatives, all of them over the age of 60. Does this have any effect on the quality of education in Bowdoin? In Mills's speech, the answer is an emphatic no. Yes, our faculty are somewhere on the left, but when it comes to teaching their academic courses, they're scrupulously neutral, fully capable of presenting a full range of opinions, at least arguable and respectable opinions, that belong in American discourse. Therefore, while it is annoying that the public might perceive our college as politically one-sided, in fact, students are not shortchanged. They get a full view of all reasonable opinions on all important topics. So, Clingenstein took a brief look at the college catalog and noticed a few oddities. Some of them are pretty simple. There was one course that touched on World War II. It was titled Women on the Home Front, or Rosie the Riveter. That's all there is for World War II, which some of us think was a rather significant event in the last century. When it comes to the study of history, we find that Bowdoin history majors are required to take 3 courses on non-Western history. They're not required to take any courses on American history. But even if they were, their choices would be somewhat constrained because Bowdoin College's history department has no American history survey courses. It has a lot of courses on very particular topics, and one begins to look into them with some detail. There are courses on race, class, and gender, or race and class and gender, or class and gender and race. And there were a total of, like, this number, I'm not entirely sure, but I think there were 8 courses on African American history, so denominated, with 0 courses on philosophical history, economic history, political history. Great swaths of American history had simply vanished in Bowdoin. Other areas seem to be receiving a generous amount of attention. Well, I need immediately to add in matters like this that neither Tom or I am opposed to the teaching of race, class, and gender as part of the history curriculum. We are rather opposed to the monopoly on the teaching of history, in which those are the only aspects of history that receive attention. Now, some of that is disputed, and maybe if I have time, I will deal with the pushback on those assertions that have emerged recently. But the next stage of this particular narrative is that Tom had published his Claremont Review of Books rebuttal to Barry Mills, and sent it to Barry Mills, officials and received no response. No word at all from official Bowdoin, other than a press officer who said, he has his story, we have ours. And quick postmodernist reply. Nothing there about there was the search, and we're not going to search for it. As it happens, the counterpart of the Williams Debate Club did think the report was rather interesting, and the Bowdoin Debate Club invited Tom up to talk. I had not met Tom at that point, didn't know him. He called me up, had read my book on diversity, and he says, I think you're the person who should go with me on this. So at his expense, I flew up to Maine and spent an evening with Bowdoin students, and some really interesting things emerged. There had just been an incident, not unlike one that I heard about this evening at Williams, in which a racial epithet had been scrawled on the door of a dorm room, and that had set off a kind of moral panic on campus that culminated in a big rally in which 200 students wearing duct tape over their mouths walked to the main hall. An audience was present, including President Mills, and one by one they peeled back the duct tape and said things like, I'm Hispanic and I am Bowdoin, I'm lesbian, I am Bowdoin, I'm lesbian and Hispanic, and I am Bowdoin. All the way through this list, some of them were just rather odd statements like, I am friendly and I am Bowdoin. But declarations of identity were the order of the day. There was, of course, theory behind this. The theory was that that hateful epithet scrawled on the door had silenced the minority community and damaged, in some deep moral sense, everyone within the community, and the silence needed to be broken. So by declaring that I am Bowdoin, they were taking back their voice and presenting themselves to the community as its rightful spokesman. President Mills, as I said, was present at the event, and afterwards said that it was his proudest day in his association with the college. So it had official approval. It was an event that expressed a kind of ritualized anger, but it was not an event that went out of control. Shortly after that, President Mills again led a march through the town that surrounds the Bowdoin campus. He attracted apparently a relatively small following, about 20 people who wanted to walk around the town explaining their guilt over this terrible event. And that was in the air when I went to the Bowdoin campus. That evening, Tom and I addressed an auditorium somewhat larger than this one, mainly made up of Bowdoin students. Their bills had been invited at the time. And we proceeded with our rough analysis based on nothing more than reading the catalog, that there did seem to be important subjects that Bowdoin was not teaching. That elicited right away people calling out from the audience, telling us that we were dead wrong, that there was nothing, absolutely nothing that Bowdoin didn't teach that they wanted to study. And for that matter, nothing important that was left out of their educations. Now, I'm not quite sure why this turned to history, but immediately did. Maybe it was something I had said about the history curriculum. That we don't need to study American history, was one student at that point. We took it in high school. Really? All of it. Yeah, everybody in this room, I'm sure, took the AP exam and scored at least a 4, most of us a 5. We don't need you to go back and study that stuff again. We've had it. Oh. Ask me any question, I'll ace it. So his knowledge of American history is so comprehensive that nothing more needed to be said about that subject. It was an easy path to see that Bowdoin College was there to fill in gaps, mostly areas of relatively minor interest that might have been missed in that high school AP course. Much of the discussion that evening went on in this vein of the students telling us that by the time they reached Bowdoin, they were project that Howells had described 40 years before, that they should be liberating themselves from the trammels of American culture, getting rid of the things that were holding them back from a fully liberated life. On the way home that evening, Tom and I talked. He put it this way, that there's a factual dispute here. We're saying that there is an actual effect of the all-left faculty, and there is something a little bit strange or defective about a curriculum that seems to leave so many topics out. But the students who are in a position, presumably to know best, deny that and say we've got it entirely wrong. So which is it? Well, not being postmodernist, not even took the position, well, that's a question, maybe we can get an answer to it. And I proposed to him that my organization take on a 6-month study at the college, that he would fund it, and I would send a research assistant there, and we would get to the bottom of just what does Bowdoin teach. That was the phrase I used, and that's the title of the report that finally emerged 18 months later at considerably greater expense. It turned into a much more difficult project than we first imagined. The report that I've now issued is the fruit of that investigation, and it presents findings that, to some degree, confirm the hypothesis that there really is a set of traceable consequences from the kind of faculty that the college has built over the years, and that the college curriculum, among other things, is capped, it's slanted, it's limited in some ways that are mostly invisible to the students. Invisible why? Well, because when you're ignorant of something, you're ignorant of it. You don't know what you don't know. And the college does a great job at convincing students that that doesn't matter. It's a college that wraps itself in many layers of flattery. Students are told they're brilliant from the moment they arrive. Their brilliance is proof against any accusation that they might be missing something, and any suggestion, such as our report, that says you may not know quite as much as you think you do, is translated into an insult that says you're stupid. Well, Bowdoin students are not stupid, at least most of them are not. They're bright, they come from the best prep schools at the tops of their classes, good schools from around the country. There's no doubt that native intelligence isn't lacking. What might be lacking is a certain degree of intellectual modesty that is a prerequisite to real learning. We'll come back to that. So where are we now? The inviting topic, what Ben asked me to speak about, is how intellectual diversity has been sacrificed for many politics. And much I can say about that. I don't want to wear out the whole hour on it, but let me say a little bit. One section of our report deals with what we call key concepts, the words, phrases, the ideas that come up over and over again in the college's official pronouncements, in the manners in which students talk to each other about what's important. I think it will be no surprise that two of the most powerful concepts on campus used over and over again are diversity and sustainability. These are ideologies in the sense that they are not subject to any kind of rational critique. Anybody who questioned diversity at Bowdoin would and is instantly labeled racist or some term that approaches that and conveys the meaning pretty quickly. Anyone who is opposed to sustainability must be simply a scientific Luddite who hasn't accepted the evidence of imminent catastrophe through global warming and the realization that capitalism and free markets and lack of are contributing factors in preventing a vigorous and immediate response to these events. Well, diversity and sustainability are fairly complex ideas. That is, they wrap into themselves some things that are probably quite true, but they take those ideas to a level and place where rational discussion of them is very difficult, if possible at all. In the case of diversity, there's a back history here that when I'm speaking to college students these days, I feel compelled to tell. Some of you may know it already, but bear with me for a few minutes. Diversity is a relatively new idea in the American lexicon. That is not the word diversity, which is quite old, but its application to social groups, dividing those groups by race and ethnicity and other characteristics, and insisting that they bear important characteristics that can be transmitted from generation to generation. It came into use in any major way after 1978, which was the year in which the U.S. Supreme Court, in the decision of Bakke versus the University of California, handed down a fractured opinion. There was a divided court with 4 people in favor of admitting Bakke was a white student of Norwegian origin to the University of California Davis Medical School, 4 other justices saying that the affirmative action policy that the University of California had employed was legitimate and should stand. And 1 justice, the 9th justice in the middle, Justice Powell. Powell gave a little bit to both sides. He decided that Bakke had been impermissibly blocked from admission to the college from the medical school, should be admitted, but he would not agree with any broad justification for why that was so. Instead, he invented his own, which was that education of all students would be improved by classroom diversity. Now, in saying that, he was rejecting some, at that point, very popular views, which were that colleges and universities had an obligation to rectify the racial oppression that was part of America's past. No, the Supreme Court had decided in a series of decisions that was not a proper role for universities to play. So you cannot justify racial preferences, said the court, by, of course, the idea that this would advance social justice off the table. You're going to justify it in a different reason. And the reason that Powell conjured up was that all students would benefit from racial diversity in the classroom because each racial group had particular points of view, and exposure to those particular points of view was an educational good in its own right. Now, there were some immediate flaws in that logic that caught the attention of liberals before it caught the attention of conservatives. One was that it depended on radical stereotyping. Know which group someone belongs to, and you know what their point of view is and what their ideas are. Second is that medical school does not consist of little seminars in which people are sitting around sharing their points of view in the first place. You're sitting in a large lecture hall. Does it matter what the color of the skin is of the person next to you? Probably not. There was a third problem attendant to all this, which was that the University of California Davis Medical School was a brand new institution, so it had no history of its own to overcome of racial oppression and discrimination. It was starting out fresh. So, starting out fresh, was there a real justification for racial preferences? Powell thought there might be. Not a single other member of the court agreed with him, but because his was the deciding vote, his opinion in the Bakke case became what's called Supreme Court dicta, something that's said but not endorsed by the court. And it entered into our lexicon slowly through the 1980s, through the 1990s. The idea of diversity as a safer, better justification for racial preferences caught on. Now, I don't have time to give a full-blown lecture on the history of diversity doctrine. It's important to know that that idea of diversity is a recent invention, and it's a cobbling together a few strands that was taught by one Supreme Court justice right in 1978. It's important to know that because when people speak of diversity today, they tend to write it back into the Constitution. They go looking for it as one of the key principles of American life, such as equality or such as liberty, which really are key constitutional issues. And you can't find a predicate for the idea of diversity in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence or the Federalist Papers, unless you maybe take Federalist number 10, which talks about factions as having something to do with diversity. If factionalism is not what diversity is supposed to be, diversity is supposed to be positive good, something that will bring us together. Now, the diversity doctrine has intellectually evolved much further than where Powell left it. And I don't have time to follow those threads on it, but when we encounter it at a place like Bowdoin, it becomes the all-purpose justification for dividing both students and faculty members by their group characteristics. So it becomes essentially the most important part of somebody when you ask them who he is, who she is, to declare group affiliation. I peel back the duct tape on my mouth and I don't say, I am Kantian, or I really love Plato's Republic, or I am a mathematician. You say, I am Asian, I am Hispanic. That tagging yourself by your primary group affiliation is the main meaning of diversity. Of course, one has to remember, Powell, that the reason diversity got its purchase in the first place is that there's supposed to be intellectual diversity. The reason we want to have people divided up into representative groups is that that's somehow going to take us to the world in which different ideas encounter each other in an intellectual forum where differences of ideas should be there. I don't know, there are many people who disagree with the idea that college is a place where open-mindedness and vigorous discussion of controversial ideas should take place. And that, presumably, what diversity is supposed to give us. Instead, it has rapidly become a set of walls that prevent discussion from taking place. The simplest form of prevention that accompanies the diversity doctrine is the ever-present, slightly unspoken, but nonetheless quite felt accusation of racism. If you attack diversity, you must be a racist. You have doubts about admitting students to college on the basis of skin color or ethnic background, you must be a racist. Anything else other than endorsement of the diversity policy makes you implicit in oppression, part of the structure of white male patriarchy, and all those other scare words that get tossed into the picture. Diversity, taken seriously as a doctrine, and Bowdoin that most certainly is taken seriously as a doctrine, is a closed door to critical thinking. It says that certain topics are off the table, as much as we may want to talk about this or that, if it touches on that third rail of diversity, we cannot talk about it, we will not talk about it, and people become truly frightened if you try to talk about it. The other issue, of course, was sustainability, which was a much more recent invention. You can probably trace it back to the environmentalist movement starting with Rachel Carson in 1962, I think it was Silent Spring. But the sustainability movement must be distinguished from the environmentalist movement. They're definitely not the same thing. The environmentalist movement, as its name implies, focused on the environment, on getting rid of pollution, cleaning up our toxic waste dumps, making sure we have clean air, clean water. Political goals that now have pretty much the consent and active support of people of all parties. Sustainability takes that a few steps further. The word itself wasn't introduced until 1987 with the Brundtland Commission report. That was a UN report that talked about the title. It was for a sustainable future, for sustainable development. And from there, the word aggregated at least two additional meanings. I've alluded to them already. One of them is that capitalism, free markets are themselves a major component of the degradation of the environment. Give people the right to pursue incentives to exploit the world's resources, and they will do so in polluting and destructive ways without sufficient attention to the needs of future generations. So something has to be done to curb the appetite of the capitalists and free marketeers. That becomes a major component of the sustainability movement. The sustainability movement has a symbol. I don't know if it's familiar with Williams. It's the three fingers go up. Sometimes it's three circles overlapping each other. They're usually labeled the environment, the economy, and social justice. The third piece of this is the wrap-all that brings in everything that is wrong with the oppressive West. It's where the academic left can put in a fight against racism, sexism, homophobia. Anything that's on the outmost is now a violation of social justice. And we cannot have a sustainable society, even if we were to achieve carbon neutrality, end global warming, get rid of nasty capitalism. We still would not have sustainability unless we get rid of these other forms of exploitation. The underlying theory is that exploitation is itself an undivided category. Exploiting iron ore on the ground and exploiting your neighbor are still forms of exploitation. And what the utopian vision of sustainability all about has to offer is a revised human nature in which there is no exploitation whatsoever. Of course, this can be elaborated in many, many different ways, and I've given quite a simplified account of what it's about. Right now, probably the major sustainability leader in the country is Bill McKibben with his organization 350.org, who is agitating for college students to demand that their colleges rid their endowments of all stocks in carbon-based energy companies. Again, I don't know if this has reached Williams, but it most certainly has reached Bowdoin, where over 500 students, a little less than a third of the student body, petitioned President Mills to rid the college of these nasty stocks, which account for 1.4% of its $900 million endowment. He won't do it, and that in itself becomes an interesting part of this story. In 2007, President Mills made Bowdoin College a signatory to the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, an ideological document now signed by some 670 college presidents that declares that any debate over global warming is finished, the science is settled, and now we must move on to the solutions. So if you thought critical thinking might involve having some questions about why there has been no global warming in the last 20 years, we cannot have that conversation at Bowdoin College. The college has ruled ex cathedra that the debate is finished. There's nothing more to be said. Science must proceed, but science must proceed simply nailing down a few random details here and there and getting on with the project of eliminating global warming. Now again, I have to pause with the confessional statement here. I am carbon neutral on all this. I don't have a stand on whether there is global warming or not global warming. I am a ecologist, not a climate scientist. I lack the expertise to change recent judgment on this. I am someone who worries a lot about the integrity of academic and intellectual inquiry. In the case of the climate change global catastrophe models, we face the problem that, as we now know, there has been a lot of mischief taking place with the analysis, with the sometimes delicious work of some of the scientists in this field, and the sheer amount of money that flows into it appears to have distorted the judgment of at least some of the advocates of this view. That said, I would think that it warrants, if nowhere else, it warrants it in the academy that we approach these questions with an open mind and not with the ex cathedra fiat that we know the answer and no further inquiry is welcome. In those terms, I find the whole idea of a college and university president climate commitment to be an offense to reason. We cannot decide as universities what issues are closed for further debate. And when college and university presidents decide that, there's a problem that flows from it. At Bowdoin, signing that declaration led a few years later to the commitment to reduce the carbon footprint of the students by a substantial amount by the year 2020. How do you get students to reduce their carbon footprint? I imagine you have some ideas about how that's done. I expect it's done here as well. It goes far beyond recycling and efforts to change lifestyles. At Bowdoin, it included recruiting the psychology department to examine ways in which to better motivate students to reduce their own carbon footprints. Something about that is distasteful for me. To think of one's faculty members sitting around in closed rooms thinking of ways to manipulate students to achieve a political and social end decided on not by the students themselves, but by their administrators, I think says something like corruption of the ideals of liberal arts education has set in. Diversity, sustainability. Those are, for sure, not only two ideologies to be found at Bowdoin, but they're the two biggest ones, and they differ from each other in some interesting ways. The diversity doctrine calls on minority students to live a life of grievance. It is to remind them that the group they belong to is a group that has been victimized in the past, and while you yourself may not have experienced victimization, you are where you are in life because your ancestors were victimized. So in some mystical genetic fashion, the history of oppression passes on from generation to generation. And while there is some truth to that, that is, decisions made by earlier generations do redound through the generations, it becomes an idée fixe, an idea that becomes an obstacle to doing anything further with your life other than focusing on your perpetual victimhood and your legacy of being a victim. That's one side of the diversity doctrine. The other side is the command that everybody else should feel guilty about this. Now, some ironists have pointed out that a brand new immigrant from Ireland who had no responsibility whatsoever for American slavery, or somebody coming from Eastern Europe, or somebody coming from South America who was light-skinned, suddenly becomes an oppressor upon landing in the United States and bears responsibility psychically and emotionally and economically for the sins of the system that oppressed people. In any case, the diversity doctrine in its aggregation of people into the oppressor class and the oppressed class demands this constant dance between I'm oppressed, you're my oppressor, yes, I'm your oppressor, I'm so sorry, what can I do to make up for it? That emotional dynamic demands a lot from majority white students. A question that rarely gets aired in these campuses is one of the reasons why the sustainability doctrine has been welcomed with such fervor by white students. It's a doctrine in which they no longer have to be the bad guys. They are welcomed in as the saviors of the planet. If there's anybody to blame, it's their parents and grandparents who set up this exploitative system. If they don't inherit guilt in the way they do on the racial and ethnic issues. So diversity and sustainability do this kind of dance with each other. Some students get more involved in one than the other. There is a kind of contest that I run into from time to time in which the sustainablies are saying to the diversifiers, well, you're really part of us because sustainability involves social justice. And the diversifiers are saying, no, you don't really understand this. Diversity is the central issue and the sustainability stuff is an add-on. Peace in that realm is officially achieved on college campuses by having two separate offices, some kind of office for sustainability and some other kind of office for diversity. Again, I don't know the situation here at Williams. That's how it works in many places, most certainly Bowdoin. Now, I've made a few comments in this long narrative that I now want to come back to. One of them is that Powell's decision in 1969 to eliminate curricular requirements is a gift that keeps on giving. Students at Bowdoin are fully persuaded that they are in command of their lives, that student autonomy is what education is all about. Liberal education means finding their own path through these things. The dissolution of curricular requirements has ended up with a lot of students who don't write very well. That's attested by every issue of the student newspaper. But also by faculty members telling peers and papers turned turned in, they certainly don't think very clearly, because they are confronted with what would appear to any fair-minded outsider with rather striking contradictions between their declared purposes and their actual actions. The dissolution of academic requirements flowed into kind of ennoblement of the student, at least in principle, as someone who's all-sufficient to make every choice that needs to be made in life. So, along with that academic side came the transformation of student life in general, the idea that the college existed in order to form character, got replaced with the idea that it's there to be a place of exploration. Now, that's a mild allusion to the hookup culture, which turns out to be in some ways related to the dissolution of academic requirements. I didn't expect to find that. It came out at us in a fairly dramatic way when we started talking to students. The key element here is choice. If I am completely sufficient to make all my choices in life, then there ought to be no college telling me who I should sleep with or when I should sleep with people any more than they should be telling me that I need to take calculus or study a foreign language. This cult of the all-sufficient individual, the elevation of personal autonomy over all social councils and social controls becomes a dizzying part of Bowdoin's ascent into its own special kind of postmodernism. Now, the notion that hookup culture has anything to do with the curriculum sounds on its face rather absurd, and all I can say to that is that as an anthropologist, I have to be led by what people tell me. And I find at Bowdoin this immense unhappiness among students expressed over and over again with their lack of ability to have enduring relations with each other, especially with people of the opposite sex. Bowdoin, as it happens, does the annual polls of the sex life of the students, from which we know with some consistency year after year that about 75% of the students admit to being part of the hookup culture, and of those who do, well more than half of them are pretty bitterly regretful of it, and saying, well, this is the only choice we have. Nobody has college dates. There is no possibility of anything else. There happens at the moment to be one undergraduate couple at Bowdoin who are married and who complain that they face almost daily taunting for their violation of the social norms of the place. How can you do that? Bowdoin, until a few years ago, kept track of how many of his students married each other within a few years of graduation. They quit doing it when the numbers plummeted to nearly zero. Right now, we have one couple that are already married. How does that bear on this thing? Well, I want to focus on the intellectual side tonight. I'm just going to leave it at that. It seems to me that once one approaches this in the spirit of anthropological fieldwork and starts looking for the ways things connect to each other, it turns out that dismantling the curriculum and replacing the ideals of a coherent education with those of self-discovery, self-invention, there are consequences that go far beyond the classroom. Let me turn back to college. Back in the early 1940s, I think the year was 1942, Bowdoin decided that it needed a statement of what a liberal arts education really is. Part of that statement, college aims always to give its students a knowledge of the culture of the Western world. They must understand and appreciate its origins and traditions, the forces essential for its operation and progress, and the values which it seeks to realize. We continue that leaders and followers alike must be acquainted with what civilization in its broadest sense implies. We couple this civilizational pitch with a, quote, concern with character as well as the mind of undergraduates. On this point, the whole college environment is an educator. And it concluded that what it wanted in the distinctive discipline of college the opportunities to achieve intellectual poise, disinterested opinion, and patient courage to pursue remote ends of choice rather than by compulsion. So, that vision of what a liberal arts education is, let's call it civilizational vision, lasted in Bowdoin until May of 1969, when President Cowles eliminated it, with the rest of his disregard for what he thought of as the dead hand of tradition. So what did he put in its place? Well, what could he put in its place? When you're liberating students from all tradition, you can't really impose another tradition. So he put nothing in its place. But colleges, no less than nature, were four vacuums, and something had to come in. So admission to the college of the 1970 bulletin involves seeking a well-rounded class of individuals who are proud of their individuality. Out goes civilization, in comes individuality. To create a spirited and diverse community, one of the earliest uses of diversity in that way. Bowdoin is seeking a class full of differences. A class full of differences. He called on the college taking a fresh start, an acquisition. This is a new definition of liberal arts. The liberal arts is the acquisition of, not knowledge, but the acquisition of an attitude towards man, and the absorption of characteristic style of thought. He derided the forms of education that involve mere transfers of information, which probably all would agree that education certainly must be more than a transfer of information. But if you write off all common learning as transfer of information, what's left? What's left is to, quote, train that man a critical and innovative mind. Tradition itself cannot be creative, he must experiment, and he welcomed, this is my favorite Italian formulation, the exhilaration of the prospect of continuing change. He read his Trotsky days. Perpetual revolution was the only thing that would work out. So now we have Bowdoin College defined in terms of group identity, self-definition, and maybe to some degree sexual adventures. That seems to me to be the heart of the story that I would have to tell. There are some other pieces of this. Current Bowdoin catalog shows the existence of 6 studies departments. They have their analogs here. There's Asian studies, Latin American studies, and African American studies. They're now called Afro studies. The gender and women's studies, and separate, unlike Williams, a queer studies department. Gay lesbian queer studies, I think is its current name. The studies departments are ones which avowedly and explicitly have a political purpose behind them. They do not exist to help students understand the world as it is with an open mind, questioning matters. They exist for the purpose of changing the world. That kind of change is, in every case, enunciated in the college catalog. So, for gender and women's studies, for example, there's a set of declarations, perhaps it's best that I read them, that say that the college is, in waste time, and I'll paraphrase, the sole purpose of gender, we're taking no further definition, is to repress women and to engage in a structure of perpetuating oppression. Now that comes without any qualifications. There is no other purpose admitted. And it's set out as the avowed purpose of the Gender and Women's Studies Department to overcome this oppression. Now, there's something slightly baffling about that. The Gender and Women's Studies program that must take as its ultimate goal the destruction of gender, because gender can only exist for the purpose of oppression, would seem to be engaged in a self-refuting enterprise. But beyond that, it's just a bizarre idea. One wonders if a conversation with the biology department has ever taken place. But of course it has. I mean, I know feminists speak to biologists. It's a matter of this adroit separation out of the idea of sex from the idea of gender. Gender is socially constructed and only socially constructed. The notion that there is any kind of interplay between biology and literature is ruled out of court. We know in advance that gender is a matter of what cultural definitions have created in the past, and because they are simply collected as instructions taught to children, the instruction booklet can be rewritten with sufficient political intervention via government and other sources of authority. Things can be changed. So, the Gender and Women's Studies Department lays out a political agenda right from the start. Take a course in that department, you know what we're going to get. Now, I have had the experience now for some time of saying things like that to students of a certain age who don't even blink. Well, of course, it's political, but what's wrong with that? Rationale has been built into this discussion that is sufficient proof against further curiosity, which is the endlessly repeated line that everything is political. So what's wrong with our being political in a way that we like, but other people are political in a way they like? That old Bowdoin curriculum, well, they were just white males protecting